Like most Star Wars fanatics born in the 21st century, I grew up watching the epic spectacle that was Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So when EmpireLUG decided to put on a collaboration to celebrate the movie's 20th anniversary, I knew this was my chance to revisit one of my favorite scenes from the film in LEGO form. But I also knew my build would be put up next to some amazing builds by some of the best builders in the EmpireLUG group, so I needed to make sure this build was not only memorable, but also high quality. My chosen scene for the MOC was when R2-D2 goes head-to-head with two super battle droids and absolutely obliterates them. While maybe not the first scene you'd think of, it's one that I haven't seen done in LEGO, so I figured it'd be a fun challenge that would help set me apart. I started by laying out a foundation so I could get a feel for the scale. I could have built the entire hangar or just a small vignette of the control panel, but I decided to pick the middle ground and build a section of wall that was big enough to be impressive while also being conducive to the amount of parts and time that I had to spend on the build. The wall would also include a section of hangar door along the left side to add some color. With the layout selected, I began designing the panel that R2 plugs into when he's controlling elevator 31174. I replicated the interesting angles seen in the film using wedge tiles, then added a control panel that took some creative liberties as a nod to my favorite game to reference in builds, LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. This might be one of my favorite parts of the finished build, and it acts as a nice centerpiece that's easily recognizable. I then attached it to the frame and began building out the floor, but something wasn't right. I can usually tell when a build's going downhill, and I started to lose motivation pretty fast. Luckily, the build deadline got extended, so I elected to start back from square one and only keep the control panel that I initially built. I took inspiration from a Jedi Temple interior MOC by Dewback Bricks for the layout, but decided to use dark bluish gray as my framing color rather than black. The first order of business was to tile off the floor. This was one area I'd change if I could go back because the medium nougat pattern is off-center from where I ended up putting the control panel, but it's hardly noticeable in the end, so I don't really mind. Next came probably the best technique of the build, which made use of some half-plate offsets and sideways building to create a sloped dark bluish gray pattern surrounded by a light bluish gray frame. I actually designed this while working on the first iteration of the build, and it's one of the few things that made it into the final version. I added in the first one, then set the control panel in place next to it and added in the second piece. And with that, the most iconic part of the build was complete, so it was time to move on to some of the more fun details. In the original scene, we see R2 crouched in a small area next to the control panel, so I figured it would be a logical area to include. I love the extra bit of color this area adds, and it's definitely the most film-accurate section of the build. From there, I needed to figure out a design to put on the wall above. Now, I'd recently gotten back from Brickworld Chicago, and while I was there, I got an absolute ton of industrial support pieces from the bulk LEGO they had. Like seriously, I have no idea when I'll ever need this many truss pieces, but they're some of the coolest LEGO parts I own, so I'm not complaining. That said, I found a few in dark bluish gray that made building up this wall pretty quick. But let's be clear, this won't be the last time you see those parts. The next design came from some weird Technic frame parts. These were used in combination with some printed tiles to create a very interesting and satisfying design. However, the subtle touch of yellow wasn't enough color for me, so I decided to take up some more wall space with a decent sized panel made from my favorite LEGO color, Sand Blue. I've been collecting parts in this specific color for the past 2 years, and I'm finally getting to the point where I can integrate it into MOCs in larger quantities, which I really enjoy doing. For the far left side, I added in a light bluish gray pillar with some stud shooters integrated into it for some extra greebling. Then set a cool looking pipe design into place to add some depth to the wall. However, there was now a gap directly above the control panel, so it was time to bring back out my truss pieces and put two of the tall ones together to create an X-shaped pattern. There was still a gap above the sand blue panel, so I filled that in with some light bluish gray as well. The ends of the MOC, however, were still wide open, so I again took inspiration from the Jedi Temple MOC from earlier and extended the dark bluish gray up from the border on the left side. I was going to do this on the right side as well, but I couldn't resist the urge to integrate just a few more truss pieces, and not in the way you'd guess. Stacking a bunch of them next to each other creates a good set of pipes, while also adding in some filler to the build that can be built off of later. Now, I just need something to partially cover them, so you guessed it, more truss pieces. I love the design with the tall trusses facing each other so much that I decided to use it again to bar the pipes off and create a design that looked like it had some support to hold up the massive hangar roof seen in the film. I capped it off with some more dark bluish gray, and the build was closing in on completion. That said, there was still a large gap in the right wall, so I figured it was time to revisit a design I created way back in 2020 for an old Jedi Fallen Order build. Basically, it uses a bunch of regular and inverted slopes with half plate offsets for 1x4 tiles to be slid in, creating a strong looking beam that just looks like it fits in the Star Wars universe. Unfortunately, it's rather fragile, but it definitely looks the part. Now there's only one gap remaining, which I filled with mostly light bluish gray bricks and some textured dark bluish gray 1x2s. I capped off the final portion of the roof with some more dark bluish gray, but I'd forgotten one last thing: figures. In order to make the droid stand up, I had to rip out some of the flooring to place down a few 2x2 jumpers. It was inconvenient, but it's better than having them fall over every time I touched the table. And with that, the build is complete. I absolutely love how clean the final product ended up being, and the small details I was able to pack into the walls definitely capture the look of a Star Wars hangar. Be sure to check out the rest of the collaboration, and until next time, Robonut out.